Hello, my name is David Brett. I'm the editor of the New Westminster Times. Joining me today is longtime New Westminster Times contributor Amy Ham. Hi, Amy.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
Today we are going to discuss a very serious topic, a matter of local, national, and international news, the subject of the mass shooting at a school in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. We're going to review some of the details of that situation with a particular focus on something that is becoming very much a topic of discussion in the media in general, and that is the identity of the shooter and possible motivations of that shooter. Uh, but before I do go any further, I just want to provide some of our audience who might not be familiar with Amy a little bit of a background. Amy Ham is uh, one of the most canceled people in the world. She is the nurse who stood up to the BC College of Nurses for standing up for women's sex-based rights and for biological reality and the proposition that men cannot literally become women, and the implications of that extending to women's safe spaces such as washrooms, change rooms, women's sports, prisons, and that the concept that men can just simply self-identify as women and then be accepted as women is a fallacy. So for standing up for that, she has been canceled, terminated from her employment, uh, gone through a witch trial, if you will, before the BC College of Nurses. This has become a cause celeb around the world. So if there's, Amy has become one of the most expert people in the transgender ideology field, and we're very fortunate to have her speak to us about this shooting today. So um, maybe I'll just put this question to you, Amy, and see what you think. Would it be fair to say that the mainstream media, the um, law enforcement itself, and perhaps just civil society is having a very difficult time wrapping their heads around the fact that it has now been disclosed and confirmed that the shooter is a biological male who was undergoing transition to be a girl?
Absolutely. You know what happened yesterday when news was breaking about this shooter and Tumbler Ridge police had issued a public emergency alert via the cell phones of everybody in the area, warning them to sort of hide indoors because there was an active shooter on the loose. And the original language that they used said, a female in a dress. And a lot of people saw that, myself included, and alarm bells started ringing because it's odd language to use. You don't hear for other mass shootings a male wearing pants is on the loose shooting people. Why did they say a female in a dress? And so I immediately questioned, is this a trans perpetrator? Is it actually a male? And the police are not sharing that information with the public out of fear of being politically incorrect. So I go online, I start searching information, and lo and behold, there are several local persons in Tumbler Ridge who have announced that indeed the shooter was a transgender identified male, a teenager. And yeah, and then so sort of in the fallout, we're now seeing today the Toronto Star and police continue to report that this is a female shooter, and that is a blatant lie. It's a complete lie. And so you have to wonder, why are they lying about this?
So for setting aside the other political implications of the trans identification of the shooter, there's immediately a safety issue with saying, be on the lookout for, and then typically there follows a description of the person to look out for, and the description is vague.
It is. And you know, my take on that description, which raised alarm bells for me, like I said, the female in a dress. And I wonder if there was someone who wrote that initial description who thought if we just say it's a female, people will be in danger because we know that it's a male. So what if we say female in a dress? And then people will be understanding that it's a person in a dress, and maybe if they see a male in a dress, then maybe they'll figure it out. But again, that is inexcusable either way because the utmost priority for the police at that moment would be to share accurate information, to share the truth, because there's an ongoing enormous public safety risk.
Mhm.
It's like people died, and you care more about not transgressing in terms of what's considered politically acceptable than you do about public safety and the truth. It's an abject failure of the police force to have done this.
So, so just so the audience knows, you are a mother of young children. My children are no longer of school age, but as a mother of young children, you can identify with the horror of this incident in Tumbler Ridge and the impact to parents. Um, would you think that it's an annoying distraction that officials and the media are sort of dancing around these details and kind of having to walk this tightrope? Don't you want the media to be just dead honest?
The media should be honest, and I think that the criticisms that some people are leveling against honest and accurate reporters, including myself and the New York Times, by saying, you know, right now you should just be focused on the victims. Well, you know what? That's not the role of media. The role of journalism, the role of media is the truth. And of course, it goes without saying that we are all mourning. And like you said, I'm a mother, I have school-age boys, and I cannot imagine the rage and the sadness that I would feel. I don't even want to try to imagine how horrific it would be. So obviously we stand with the victims, but it's to say that it's political to be focused on who committed the crime. That's not what is political. What is political is to be interested in suppressing the truth and to say that nobody should be talking about who did it and why. The truth is not political. What is political is suppressing the truth and hiding the motivation and the reason for the crime occurring in the first place. That is inviting further violence. So I wholesale reject the characterization that we're now seeing. And, and I think maybe mentioned the Toronto Star is reporting that the shooter was a female, and the police in their media appearances are also reporting that a female committed this crime. That's not true. That's not true.
Okay, let's talk about that press conference that the RCMP held earlier today, where it was revealed that the individual, Jesse, and there's the last name they spelled out, was born a biological male and had begun to transition to becoming a girl. I think they said about 4 years ago.
3 years
So
ago, yeah,
3 or 4 years ago. So
yeah.
the shooter, 18 years old as of 2026. So this was um, let's face it, a child who is doing undergoing transition. It's not understood the degree of transition, but even though the RCMP revealed these details, they still called her, used the word her and she to describe the shooter. So this rather uh, awkward and strange situation. Um, so what else? The other thing that came out in the press conference was there was questions about the mental stability of the shooter and and it came out that apparently there have been multiple calls to the home where the mother and another sibling had been murdered at the home. Multiple calls regarding mental health issues. So
Hmm.
getting into the quote motivation and this issue of mental illness, what do you think about that? The the mental illness component and this sort of overlap with transitioning.
One of the first things that I did yesterday, so when I first had these alarm bells ringing about this weird language the police used, and I questioned this. I feel like this is a transgender shooter, and then I saw it was verified by local accounts claiming to be neighbors of or persons who knew the mother Jennifer Strang, who was I think the first person killed by her son. I was trying to find everything I could about them online, and I happened to notice that Jennifer and I were in a private Facebook group. We were both in the same group. So, and this is a group about parenting. And I immediately went and I searched for every post that she's made over the years. And lo and behold, I found posts that she made 10 years ago when Jesse Strang, the shooter, was 7 years old. And she had been posting at this time at pleading, please don't judge me. I'm just looking for help. But this is what's going on. And so she shared publicly in this group at the time that she was concerned because Jesse was at times very mean and also would, and this is an exact quote from her, would display a devious grin after physically hurting his siblings. And, she kind of couched this with, but sometimes he's really nice and yada yada. And then she said, and the school wants to do behavioral assessments because they're also concerned about his behavior, and I'm kind of uncomfortable with that. But what it goes to show is that this is someone who, from a very early age, had clear mental health concerns, behavioral concerns, and I think more details will emerge about what exactly happened. But we know that this is also a family that had a safe full of guns in their home, and that this child was raised and trained to use guns and had a eventually got a license to use firearms, despite the fact that he had very clear mental health issues. And from what the mother described 10 years ago, he had an issue with sadism.
Hmm.
It's very disturbing.
Well, so let's delve into uh, that mental health part a little bit here. Apparently, according to the press conference, Jesse was at one time remanded under the Mental Health Act. So this is someone who had exhibited behavior that indicated he was a danger to himself and others. That's the kind of the standard for someone to be apprehended and incarcerated under the Mental Health Act. So when we
Or,
talk
I mean,
about,
to clarify,
yeah,
danger to yourself or others, not and
or,
others. It could be either
okay,
or. Yeah.
yeah, good point. So he was apparently he could have been a danger to himself and his parents. It sounds like there was a concern about violent tendencies and untreated mental illness. So here's where the political kind of, what do you call it? Kind of control state we're in, where certain language and certain words and certain speech is now being compelled to be silenced. So the fact that we're talking about the shooter as a male in our society will draw this charge of quote unquote transphobia or racism or even fascism or the most horrible backlash can result from people speaking about these truths. So you've had a lot of experience with this, obviously. What is the degree to which the society's kind of turned in on itself and wrapping itself up in these issues?
We can't carry on with hiding from inconvenient truths and pretending that there isn't a pattern that's observable there in the United States, where, the part of the reason this is so shocking for Canada is that we don't have mass shootings. It's extremely rare for us. And I think this will go down as the third most serious mass shooting we've ever had. But in the United States, this happens more frequently. And in the last, I think, 7 or so years, almost all of the most recent mass shootings there have been perpetrated by transgender identified individuals, or in the case of Charlie Kirk, the political commentator and founder of Turning Point USA, who was assassinated. His assassin was the male partner of a transgender identified male. So again, it's this connection to trans activism. And I just think, shame on anyone who tries to suggest that we shouldn't notice this pattern that is clearly emerging, and we shouldn't acknowledge the truth and seek to understand why is this happening and what can we do to prevent it. We shouldn't be just treating this entire population of persons with kid gloves and giving them a free pass when it's becoming clear that there are grievous mental health and behavioral problems going on. And you have to sort of wonder, is trans, which there's a lot of evidence to show that it's being for youth contagion in terms of their identity, and is this being used as a catch-all for other mental health issues that are being left unaddressed and untreated?
Mhm.
And like, how can we prevent this from happening again? If we refuse to acknowledge the truth, we won't know.
Yeah.
And, again, I'm just so sickened by the people suggesting that it's political to say the truth, because no, what is political is hiding the truth.
Yes. So let's talk about that, the nexus of mental illness and what is called gender affirming care. So viewers might not realize that in the New Westminster Times is multiple articles doing a deep dive into Amy's case and the hearings that proceeded in front of a panel of the BC College of Nurses and Midwives. So one of the most fascinating, so I should say that these proceedings involved expert witnesses, and one of Amy, your most fascinating expert witnesses was Dr. James Cantor, a Canadian, who arguably one of the leading experts on these issues in the world. He's a gay man. He doesn't have he he's someone who had a background in literally sort of being a gatekeeper for adult males who were choosing to live as women and possibly undergo a surgery. So his testimony was incredibly powerful. One of the things he said that I thought was extremely important was that he was very much opposing this quote unquote gender affirming care as the default recommendation because what his studies had found is that a lot of the teenagers or even tweens, if you will, presenting with what was called gender dysphoria, I guess it's still called that, but had multiple co-occurring mental illnesses or neuroses. And his point was, well, shouldn't we treat those first instead of saying, oh, well, um, you think you're confused about your gender, you're uncomfortable with your gender. Well, let's just push you down a path toward becoming the opposite sex as a means of quote curing you.
Yeah. In
isn't that what's happening in society that people that we should be able to free to talk about that?
Yeah, and what we're seeing, you have persons with a lot of mental health issues, and then you have activists that are gender ideologues, and they push this notion that number one, you can be born in the wrong body. You could have a brain that belongs to someone of the opposite sex, and if you get this medical treatment, you will literally become the opposite sex, and then you will be cured of everything that ails you, and you will be happy, and you will no longer want to kill yourself, and you will be totally fine. And so when you have youth in particular with a lot of comorbid mental health issues, and they see these activists pushing this narrative, it's pushed in our schools, it's pushed by the medical system, it's pushed by mainstream media, including the CBC, and it's presented as like, oh, hey, did you ever feel like this or like that? Well, you're probably trans, and if you trans yourself, then everything's going to be fine. And as we know, because we're now seeing a huge number of detransitioners, they've been sold a lie, obviously, and transitioning is not a cure-all for all of these things. So this case of Jesse Strang seems to potentially fit into that, is that this is a young kid that clearly from the age of at least 7 had behavioral and possibly mental health issues. And then at some point in his life, discovered the notion of being trans and perhaps was like pushed along this medicalized pathway, and the other mental health issues seem to have gone completely unaddressed. He had even posted on, people online have since discovered his now deleted but archived Reddit account where he had been posting about the fact that after going on these cross-sex hormones, he was having extreme difficulty accessing mental health services. And this is despite the fact that he felt that being on cross-sex hormones was um, really affecting his mental health. And he was worried about it, but he couldn't even get this care that he needed. So, in essence, it's easy to just go on hormones and they'll be like, here, take these hormones, you'll be fine. But then he can't even get the mental health support that he so clearly desperately needed. It's such a broken system.
Right. So, just to reiterate, if a teenager in this case presents with serious uh, psychoses or serious mental health problems, in this case, such that he was remanded under the Mental Health Act, uh, this doesn't the transitioning concept uh, create a huge complication, like you just described about there's new medications, are they compatible with the antipsychotic medications? And furthermore, what about all the attention, all this showering of positive attention from adults, teachers, and on social media and in the popular press? Oh, suddenly, if someone is transitioning, they're almost like a celebrity. Doesn't that add further delusional um, potential ideation amongst someone
Yeah.
who's prone to psychotic thinking?
I think it does. And you'll see sort of the more old school transsexuals, or the sort of more rational transgender identified persons. So I know a lot of them who recognize that they can't literally change their sex. They also recognize that they experience gender dysphoria. They're uncomfortable with their physical body. They want to change it because that makes them happiest, and they're adults. So go ahead, do what makes you happy. I don't have a problem with that. But they're sort of recognizing that this narrative is it's the exact opposite of that, and we're like drawing these mentally ill persons into it who are not necessarily what would be considered a classical transsexual person, and then they're concerned about the impact on their own community because it looks horrible for all trans persons to see that all of these sort of mentally ill people are being brought on board into their community. But and I don't want to get into an argument because the mainstream narrative is that anyone who says they're trans must immediately be affirmed in their gender, and that is the official healthcare policy of our health authorities, including Vancouver Coastal Health, where I was fired after 13 years of working there loyally as a registered nurse and a nurse educator uh, for speaking the truth about this issue. And it's like their policies are so detached with reality. And then so you're basically catching all of these people and calling them trans people, and they're very different from what you would have seen 10, 20 years ago, the people who are identifying as trans. It's a very different population.
Hmm. Well, doesn't it stand to reason that someone who's diagnosed with psychosis, who has having a problem disassociating from reality, is given yet another effectively dissociative theory that they're not who they actually are. They're not, their physical body is just a false manifestation of their real identity, which is somewhere inside. This isn't it fair that the media and civil society should be able to question the wisdom of uh, introducing a new kind of almost like a paranormal concept into people who may be paranoid about their identity and what reality is. So
Yeah.
how do they know they're grasping what's reality? Aren't we making that potentially dissociative, violent behavior worse?
I think so. And, that's the basis of all of this, including the fact that we are so willing to hand out hormones, puberty blockers to people who question their gender and they immediately get affirmed. Like you called it potentially paranormal, but what I've said about it is that it's an unfalsifiable metaphysical belief, and at its core it is the same philosophical idea of mind-body dualism. It suggests that you can have a mind or a consciousness that is separate from and at odds with your physical body. And that is not a scientifically sound or proven idea. That is not science. And healthcare should be based in science. That is philosophy, and it is akin to a religious belief. It's sort of this progressive pseudo-religious belief that that you can have a gender soul that exists separately from your body. And once you accept that belief, then what falls after that is that anybody who makes a claim about their gender soul, you have to immediately believe them because it is an unfalsifiable idea. There is no way of proving whether or not it's a genuine feeling or not. It throws diagnostic criteria out of the window. There used to be much more strict diagnostic criteria for the sort of traditional transsexuals because it was looking at how was their dysphoria or their feelings of distress, how did this affect their lives? Versus now it's like, oh, you just have a gender soul. So if you say you're this gender, well, you are this gender. And it does a huge disservice to persons like I'm sure this trans shooter.
So the nexus between the gender affirming care, mental illness, and the way in which the healthcare system is addressing this, that's one issue. I'd like to get into another issue at this moment in time when it comes to the trans activist movement, and that is this concept of radicalization. So something viewers might not know that um, the New Westminster Times has done a lot of documenting of uh, these transgender rallies, the Million March for Children and the counter protests. It has been astonishing, and we've reported extensively on this, how radical and how quickly the trans activist movement associates with what are known to be violent elements of the activist movement, such as Antifa and Hamas and the sort of uh, quote unquote pro-Palestine elements that are sympathetic to terrorism.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk about that, the way in which it's once someone is sort of transitioning, they're caught up in this bandwagon effectively of
Yeah.
radicalization that could make someone potentially more violent.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense when you look at it from the outside is why would these persons who accuse people like you and I of being anti-trans or anti-LGBTQ bigots of why would they align with Hamas, a radical Islamist terrorist group where in Islam homosexuality is forbidden and punishable by death. It doesn't make any sense. But though you have to understand that it's because they're so enveloped by an ideology of critical theory. And so they look at the world in a very black and white manner and they look at groups. They don't really see fine grain. They're just looking at groups as, is this a group? Are they oppressed or are they the oppressor? And so when they're sold this narrative, as they were during the pro-Palestine movement, that Israel is the oppressor, Palestine is the oppressed, so then they align with a literal Islamic terrorist group who, you know, people made jokes about the LGBTQ people aligning with them. It's like chickens for KFC. And it's true, but they're so blinded by ideology that they don't see nuance anymore. And it's really astounding to see that, and it's so incredibly difficult to break through to people who are so caught up in such a black and white way of viewing the world. Um, in particular, when our institutions and our media are captured by the same ideology and they're working overtime to reinforce these lies that these people are telling.
Yes, I was documenting a trans activist counter protest, and some of the quote unquote muscle that were in the crowd that were coming after me and trying to block me from filming and shunting me around from point A to point B were wearing keffiyehs and were associated with the terror anti-Samadoun. Uh, we see the same sort of Samadoun activists in the indigenous, the rallies that are in support of the indigenous narrative. So you have this crossbreeding, if you will, of radical, uh, I guess, radicalization. So why is it that we can't talk about this as a society? Why is it that, like you say, if you speak up about the potential harms of gender affirming care or Daniel Smith in Alberta is being demonized and and now we're in the midst of the Olympics and there's the whole issue of women or men in women's sports. So why is it that the media and society seems to want to blind itself to these obvious realities?
I think that it's fear-based and it's a result of the fact that this sort of pernicious ideology permeated our institutions and the media slowly. It crept up on a lot of us until it reached the point where if you spoke out, then what would happen to you is what happened to me, is that, I'm still going through a legal battle more than 5 years later. I've been slapped. I lost my career. I've been slapped with a 93, almost $94,000 costs that I have to pay to the college that persecuted me from the get-go based on purely political reasons. It's and now the atmosphere is so chilled in terms of anyone speaking the truth that it's going to be really difficult to turn things around. But what I do think is positive is that there are outlets like the New Westminster Times, and there are numerous other independent media outlets in this country who are challenging the official narrative that you will hear from CBC, from the Toronto Star. And, we've frankly had enough. And the fact remains that, and what I also stress is so important for people to do is if you are there's the term woke. It's like if you're a woke person, you buy into all of this. And sort of the flip side is if you're awake, you're someone who understands the truth and what's going on. So if you are awake, which is sort of anti-woke, have conversations with everyone you know and tell them the truth and talk about what's going on because there's a culture of fear in speaking out. But the more people who understand what's going on and the more individuals who stand up, we will be able to turn it around, but there will require a very concerted effort. And definitely, again, going back to independent media like the New West Times, we're going to play a critical role in changing this and in turning the culture around.
Okay, well, thanks for that background in what's happened to you. I'm not sure that everyone knows the degree to which you have been persecuted on this issue. Um, what is the most up-to-date uh, situation with your status? You're appealing the ruling of the BC College of Nurses to the Supreme Court.
Yes, so I don't have a court date yet. I hope to have one that might happen in the next 2 to 4 months. There's a backlog in all of Canada's courts, unfortunately. So it's been just about a year since the guilty verdict came down that said I was guilty of unprofessional conduct for my off-duty conduct in relation to articles that I had written, podcast appearances where I had talked about gender ideology and said that you can't change your sex, men can't become women, things of that sort. And then my the guilty verdict said that I have to receive a 1 month suspension of my nursing license and pay almost $94,000 in fees back to the College of Nurses. And so that punishment is on hold until the appeal happens. And in addition to that, I've filed at the BC Human Rights Tribunal complaints against Vancouver Coastal Health. They fired me. That I had already been persecuted by Vancouver Coastal Health, my employer of 13 years, for a very long time, but I was under threat of being immediately fired if I said anything that they were doing to me. So, a lot of people knew that I had this public fight with the College of Nurses, and they didn't know that I was simultaneously undergoing this concurrent battle with my employer. And there were these public campaigns to mass report me to them because of what I was writing and saying on Twitter about trans. None of this is about patients. I've never had a patient complaint. I've cared for more transgender patients than I can even remember or count. And I've never had a single issue. I reached an educator slash management position in my career relatively early on. I loved my career at one point, and it was just it was devastated by activists who didn't like my political views expressed outside of work. So, as I said, Human Rights Tribunal complaint against Vancouver Coastal Health and against the college for discrimination on the basis of political belief. And then the BC Nurses Union is supposed to be representing me for having been fired, and it's very questionable the job that they're doing. And I would have to say that I'm on the verge of suing them for a failure to represent because they've done very little to help me and in my opinion seem to be aligned with Vancouver Coastal Health rather than me on the fact that I was fired because of off-duty statements about my political beliefs. So it's
Well,
it's an
yeah.
entire mess, and it's unacceptable that anyone should experience this in Canada. And I don't expect to be honest, I don't expect to win. I'm represented by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, and they're incredible and amazing. And I think a lot of the work that the Justice Center does, and part of the reason that I've agreed to carry on this legal fight for so long, is just to raise awareness, even if we don't win, because the legal system is as captured as the healthcare system. So, even though I know that I'm right and I should be victorious, I don't know that that will happen. But it's like when I said we need to have these conversations with people who don't necessarily know the truth or what's going on to sort of change minds. And that's also why I continue fighting legally, is because I think the truth will always win if people are able to hear it.
Very well said. And in addition to your stellar career as a nurse, you are no slouch as a journalist. You have a degree in journalism and also are a columnist for the National Post and other outlets. So let's talk about some of the criticism that will no doubt come flying at you and the New Westminster Times for just having this conversation and probing the nexus of gender affirming care, transgender ideology, and violent shootings at schools. This will be seen as, oh, well, um, you don't have the facts. Let's be clear. What are the facts? And this is something get your reaction to. I think the media's role often in such cases is to be free to ask questions, to get answers and facts that will result in the truth winning out. So if the media is embargoed from asking specific questions or probing potential angles and motives to this Tumbler Ridge shooting, how does that serve the public good?
It doesn't. And I've received a lot of backlash over the last day, and I've seen other media outlets receiving backlash for reporting on the identity of the shooter. And they're suggesting we should only be focused on the victims and expressing our empathy and how sad we are. And you know what? It again, that's a very disingenuous sentiment. It goes without saying that the media, everyone working in media, is obviously grieving this horrible crime, but the media has a role and a job. Let's say a parent whose child was horrifically murdered in this shooting was on social media not talking about their child and just talking about the gender identity of the shooter. I think, okay, fine, that might be a fair criticism. Why is this person only talking about the identity of the shooter and they haven't even mentioned their child? But look, we're the media. We are in the business of reporting the facts and telling the truth. We're not here to just, share condolences. That's not our job. We have a job and we're fulfilling that role. And it's disingenuous and it's just an attempt to thwart the truth by suggesting that the media shouldn't be telling the truth in a moment of national grieving. It's just complete BS.
Yeah, let's talk about the journalistic uh, endeavor for a second. When I took a course in writing for the media at BCIT, there was what was called the five W's: who, what, where, why, when. In this story, we need to know who is a valid question. It is the correct question. Who was this? Who did this? Who were the victims and who's the perpetrator? And also the question, why? Why did this happen? And I think when it comes to mass shootings, this is the most important question and the biggest uh, impact of social importance is that people are trying to wrap their heads around why. And if the transgender identification of the killer is a fact, it has now been confirmed by police that this is a biological male who And now let's get into those facts a little bit more because you did mention something. You'd learned that he was on puberty blockers, so he had not only had to starting in on social transitioning, but also medical transitioning.
Yeah, I don't know if he took puberty blockers, but I know he was definitely on estrogen because it looks as though he started identifying as trans about 3 years ago. So, I think at that point he would have already been going through puberty. So I'm not sure if Lupron was given, but he was absolutely on cross-sex hormones.
Okay, so these are facts that have a bearing on a possible uh, motive. Well, and let's face it, the concept of motive is hard to apply when there's mental illness involved because someone who's in psychosis is imagining things, is uh, laying blame at the feet of invisible operators. Perhaps they think they're being controlled by outside forces, the devil, or some other. They're not in control of themselves. They're just acting out on it. So there's a million different psychotic scenarios that could lead someone to mass shooting. But um, this idea that someone who has a history of mental illness is now being, I don't want to say pushed down a path of transition, but shouldn't we as a society be able to peel back the layers of that aspect of this particular case in Canada? It's not in the US, it's here in our province in British Columbia. Shouldn't we be able to really dissect this case in granular detail so that we can ask ourselves this could be avoided in the future? If there's anything that could lead to um, possible uh, reduction in the risk of this reoccurring, shouldn't we be allowed to investigate that?
Yeah, anyone with good, wholesome intentions would want that. And like I said, trying to suppress the truth, that is politically motivated. Anybody who truly, genuinely wants to prevent this sort of harm should not be afraid of asking difficult questions and discovering difficult truths, even if those truths challenge their political narrative or the personal narrative that they've been sold by activists or by physicians. Um, it's children were slaughtered, and I'm already seeing um persons like I mean, I sort of hate to even use her name, but she's a left-wing influencer, very, as in my opinion, unprincipled, unscrupulous person called Rachel Gilmore, who's out there today saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry to the trans community. You don't deserve this." And it just makes me sick. I hope that this will wake people up to the fact that persons who have been critical of this ideology have for years been trying to raise alarm bells and to say, we're not motivated by hate, we're motivated by concern. And one of those concerns is the transitioning of children who are struggling and mentally ill and not doing well, and they're just sold transition as a solution to their problems. So, that's my hope from this, is that um, people will see what actually happened and will be willing to discard the opinions of the far left and media like the Toronto Star, who are trying to lie about what happened, and just finally wake up and say, why did this happen? What were the reasons, and what can we do to prevent it in the future? It's so critical that we engage with the truth.
Totally. And maybe just to summarize, I think it's important that we hammer home a fundamental point. We're not talking about a teenager who just simply one day said, well, I think I'm a girl. The entire social structure, from the education system to the medical system to civil society to social media to celebrity, Hollywood celebrity, is creating like a super highway for these kids that the default position is once a kid says, I'm the opposite sex, there's a series of things that kick in automatically that if you don't affirm that, you could be thrown in jail almost. Uh,
Yep.
it's almost it's mandatory affirmation. So isn't
Yeah.
this somewhat immoral if a kid is mentally ill, has all of these, in this specific instance, it's been confirmed, mental illness was present, such that the Mental Health Act was engaged in his case. Isn't it totally wrong to say it's almost like there's an invisible hand pushing kids in that direction, and it's the force of law is now behind it.
It
You could
is.
be in
There's
jail.
yeah, Canada's anti-conversion therapy bill criminalizes not immediately affirming the stated gender of any individual. So when you hear anti-conversion therapy bill, you think of the historical notions of conversion therapy, which was very traumatic, where they used to send gay kids or teenagers to these camps to try to make them straight again. And most of us think that was horrible, and we agree that that shouldn't be happening in our society. But when this new anti-conversion therapy bill was passed a few years ago, it included gender identity conversion therapy. And what so many people fail to recognize is that if you prohibit gender identity conversion therapy, you're making it illegal for therapists, for parents, for the healthcare system. And this is in the criminal code. You can go to jail if you don't affirm the stated gender of someone. So it's such a departure from the original language that I think people understand that bill to mean. And it's like a Trojan horse that it was included in this. And again, this speaks to the notion that people really need to understand what is going on and what's happening to our kids. And
Mhm.
I posted today that the new Westminster School District sent an email out to parents, including myself. I have two young boys who are in the public school system, sort of condolences, and we stand in solidarity, and it's horrible what happened with the shooting. And then they said we've put all of the flags at half-mast. And the New York Times has reported on this as well. Every single school in our district has a Progress Pride flag, and the district school logos were redesigned to include the Progress Pride flag in the background, and they were installed on the front doors of all of the schools last year. So every child walking into uh, elementary, middle, and high school sees their school logo with the Progress Pride flag behind it. And my comment on that was, screw this putting the flags to half mast. Get these flags out of the schools, because it's a harmful ideology. And what is it going to take for people to finally wake up and realize what's actually going on?
Yeah, so just to hammer this home once again, you have it is a legitimate line of inquiry, and it is not fair for anyone to criticize you or me or anyone out there looking in to the transgender process that this kid was going through. Just to hammer it home again. So you have a young man who with mental illness, and let's say you're a psychiatrist and you have a treatment of medication, therapy, all kinds of different therapeutic approaches to address the underlying mental illness. Now the kid pops up and says, "Well, I think I'm a girl. I'm a girl." Boom, the law now has to navigate, or you're going down path A. Well, now you're going down this other path. And that path, let's face it, there is no sufficient historical clinical evidence to confirm that it is positive or negative. And the information is coming out worldwide that it's not good.
Hmm.
That gender affirming care. So, and then other provinces, other jurisdictions are pulling back on gender affirming care. So maybe finally I could ask you this final question. British Columbia and Canada in general, where do we stand, uh, benchmarked against other nations in the world when it comes to gender affirming care?
Canada is behind in terms of acknowledging and recognizing. It's widely known around the world that gender affirming care is the largest medical scandal of our era. And you mentioned, Alberta and Saskatchewan have attempted to change the way that we address trans youth, and within Canada, they're just being framed as anomalies who are going against best evidence, and even Trans Care BC, they're still citing the WPATH guidelines. That's what they're using to transition minors in our province. And this is a discredited organization. They've been shown to have used pedophiles for the input of helping define their standards of care, including removing all age restrictions for the transition of minors, and including for adding eunuch as a gender identity, again, for adults and for children. So it's extremely dubious. They've been thoroughly discredited around the world. There are numerous places where children can no longer access puberty blockers, including the United Kingdom. So after the Cass report came out, so Dr. Hilary Cass was a retired pediatrician. She did a review of gender affirming care for youth in the UK, and her report sort of eviscerated what was happening to youth, where there had been whistleblowers at the Tavistock Youth Gender Medicine Clinic. And after that, they made it illegal there for youth to receive puberty blockers, and this gender affirming care outside of clinical trials. And so now the UK is actually trying to do these clinical trials. And horrifically, these researchers announced beforehand that they're going to have to tell the test subjects, that we're talking about little boys and girls, that they should freeze their eggs and sperm before doing these puberty blocker trials. So now there's a backlash. Don't even allow it to happen in the context of a research trial because it's so unethical and we know that it's wrong. So, you know, like I said, is people know that this is wrong, and Canada is still refusing to acknowledge truth and reality, and it's so incredibly infuriating. It's like we know that this is a horrible medical scandal, and it's just such an indictment of our officials and of our media and of our medical system that they are too terrified of the truth to stop something that is harming kids and families, and just destroying people. And it certainly appears that this latest shooter um, was caught up in this ideology. And we've got to ask the question of exactly what happened and why. And we have to shine a light on the truth.
Exactly. And so just to wrap up, uh, as to the motivation, it is unknown at this point. We don't know 100% sure. We don't know what was in the mind of the shooter or all of the factors that may have led to it. Questions were posed about, well, were people targeted? Was this, going after specific individuals? Was this as a grudge? Uh, or was it motivated by any particular ideology or another? We don't know. I think just so people know, the purpose of the conversation that we're having today is to push back on the notion that when it comes to the why, the identity and psychological state of the shooter, including their transgender status and possible treatments for that, are not off limits. Everything there should, it is not serving society to have this kind of embargo against inquiry about transgender issues and ideology. And that's the state we're in now. We're just not allowed to go there. We're smeared, we're labeled, we're canceled. And Amy, as you've spoken, you've been literally booted right on out of your profession. People are being canceled right and left. You're very brave. I mean, imagine all the people who are thinking what you're thinking, but they're not saying anything for fear of losing their livelihoods, not only in health, but also in education, any government institution, any regulated body. The regulatory system of our whole country has been completely captured by this ideology, and this has got a stranglehold on the way things are decided on the courts, the legal system, the law societies. Um, we're in a bit of a muddle right now. So, horrible situation unfolding in that has happened in Tumbler Ridge. And our hearts go out to the people of that city and to the families affected. And uh, I thank you for listening today. And as I have said before, if if you appreciate the work of the New Westminster Times and the stands we take on controversial issues, I would invite you to support the New Westminster Times. We do have costs. It is not free to do the type of journalism we're doing. So if you go to newwesttimes.com, there's a little button up in the right-hand corner that says support our work. And if you would feel so inclined, we would really appreciate your support. And we will put it to a good cause, which is, as Amy said, pursuing the truth. So thanks, Amy, for joining me today. And we will be watching this story unfold with the rest of the country, and verily the entire world is got their eyes on BC right now. So
Absolutely.
thanks. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you for having me. And just one final word
Yes,
is if everyone could keep Maya Edmond in their thoughts right now. She was a 12-year-old who survived the initial attack. She was shot in the head and the neck. She was airlifted to a Vancouver hospital and she's fighting for her life. And apparently, physicians told her mother that she's not expected to survive tonight, but she's still hanging on. So I hope that everyone will keep Maya in their thoughts.
absolutely. That's a brilliant thought to end on. So everyone, keep her and all of the victims' families in their prayers and thoughts. So thanks, Amy, for this very uh, deep discussion. And thanks, everyone, for your time and attention today.
Thank you.